Thank you. Good morning. It's a delight to be here and always wonderful to be on the same panel as Mary. So good morning. My name's Phil Emonson and we've got 20 minutes. I'm going to do about 10 minutes and then I'm going to hand over to Beth. I'm going to spend the first 10 minutes looking at resilience and what it is as a term. And then Beth's going to look more specifically at Cornwall and some case studies from your local area. Now, when I joined the sector as a graduate 18 years ago, back in 2006, we didn't talk about resilience. Resilience wasn't a thing. But we spoke about flood defence and we spoke about flood prevention. Our approach was to try and keep the water out, King Canute style. It was, I suppose, linked to our heritage, our traditional way of trying to manage the extremes of our weather that probably dated back to the Victorian era, where we built traditional hard defences to try and prevent and keep water out. It was a battle. It was us versus the elements. But then something's changed, hasn't it? Over the last 18 years or so, we've now got terms like resilience, like adaptation. So what I'm going to do is just sort of explore what's happened and where we're at. So back in 2007, you might remember we had big floods across large parts of the UK. And what came on the back of that were reports like Making Space for Water and the findings from the Pitt Review. And slowly the dial has shifted. Slowly we've started to see the introduction of the term resilience and the introduction of the term adaptation. And it's a recognition that with our changing climate, we can't keep doing the same things over and over again. So we are now using this term resilience. And as it says upon the screen there, we now know and acknowledge that perhaps we can't keep doing those same things again and again. What worked in the past, building that bigger wall, perhaps won't be the solution for tomorrow, or indeed tomorrow's tomorrow. So there is a case for change. We are building this case for change. And if you look at the last 18 years, PFR that Mary's just been talking about, we didn't have PFR 18, 20 years ago, nor did we have SUDS, nor did we have nature-based solutions. So actually, our approach to flood risk management has evolved quite substantially in that time. And what we're now talking about are broader, more holistic and more integrated solutions. So at JBA, we've been trying to think about, well, what is this term resilience? We use it. It's ubiquitous now. It's everywhere. It's the title of today's conference. Mary's been talking about it. We've got speakers later today talking about resilience. And we all assume that everyone's on the same page. We all assume that when we talk about building resilience, that everybody knows what we're talking about. But they might not be. We might all have different interpretations of the term resilience. So at JBA, we've been trying to think, well, how can we make sure that when we're engaging with stakeholders, communities, society, the whole of society, that actually we're all on the same page, we're all trying to achieve the same outcome. Because unless we take time to just stop and think about all these different solutions that we've got, nature-based solutions, PFR, and we really define what we mean by resilience, there's perhaps a risk that maybe we're not all on the same page. So it is more than perhaps those traditional approaches of building a bigger wall or trying to simply protect a community against a rising tide or reinstating infrastructure before the next storm, as important as those steps are. It's more than that, isn't it? It's about more holistic and more integrated solutions. As I say on the slide, it's about better and more integrated solutions. So it's about the preparedness component that Mary's just been talking about. It is about how we use our land. It is about how we plan sustainably. But it's also then about how we recover and capture that lived experience. It is about the whole of society. Now, this phrase whole of society has come into play in the last couple of years. You may or may not be aware, but in December 2022, the government released a national resilience framework. And in that, it spoke about how resilience should be a whole of society endeavour, something that we all aspire to. So it is about the whole of society and it's about outcomes. Resilience is the outcome. It's not the thing that you do. It's the outcome that you achieve. And it's about outcomes, as it says on the slide, that allow that whole of society to become more aware of their risk, able to adapt, and then have the capacity to respond and recover. Aware, adapt, respond, recover. Just hold those thoughts, those words in your mind for a few minutes. Now, when you came into the room this morning, or those of you that are here in person, some of my colleagues were handing out little post-it notes, and you were asked to write down what resilience means to you. So I've got a few of them here, and we'll just go through some. Because, as I said, everybody's interpretation of the word is different. And let's say there's 100 people here today. So we've got one here, resilience. It's about having a level of preparedness to cope with future events. It's the ability to withstand an issue and come back every time. So I guess that's about capacity, isn't it? It's about overcoming difficulties. Resilience is peace of mind in flood risk areas. It's the ability to trust in a measure that can ultimately protect and serve to provide comfort. So even in 4 or 5 post-it notes from 100 people there, I've got words like withstand, protect, recover. There was another one in there, bounce back ability, which is something we often hear. So even a very simple, quick snapshot, we're all using slightly different terms. Now, over the next few slides, I've got some images. I've got some images that, it could be argued, depict different components of resilience in terms of our communities, people, how we work with our landscape, how we protect our communities. And what I want you to do, as the images are up on the screen, I want you to quietly and independently, just personally take a minute and look at the pictures and think about how they make you feel, but also think about what that image is telling you about resilience. Should have got a backing track for this, shouldn't I? 10 points for anyone who can spot the location. I heard it whispered. Well done. Now, at JBA, as I said, we've taken resilience, and those images there are part of a wider piece where, as a consultancy, we're trying to go about engaging in a different way. We're consultants. We work with the Environment Agency and our clients to use data and science to communicate complex ideas. But we've actually started working with artists as well to help us communicate, again, complex issues around climate and climate change using emotion and sentiment and reaction. So over at the side, we've got a piece of artwork that we had captured from a community in Yorkshire, with some narrative, and there's a QR code which you can scan and watch a video. So during the break, please come over and have a look and take a moment, as we've all just done with those images, to have a look and see how they make you think about resilience. What I've got now is a short video for 2 or 3 minutes, which explains our definition at JBA, and those words aware, adapt, respond, recover, and how we think that helps us provide a definition, for want of a better word, of resilience that perhaps we can all relate to.
Increasingly, we are hearing the term resilience, but do we know what it actually means? Resilience, like risk, is a term that can be interpreted and understood in many different ways. Different disciplines, professions, and services will all have their own language and vocabulary when it comes to discussing resilience. So what do we mean when we refer to resilience? At JBA, we've adopted a simple, straightforward framework to help us all communicate collectively the need to build resilience in the light of our changing climate. Simply put, resilience is the ability to absorb and recover from a shock or harm, and there are 2 underlying principles to understanding this model of resilience. Firstly, this shock or harm, or even the threat of a shock, disrupts the normal functioning of a system, be that an asset, a community, an organisation, agriculture, or an ecosystem. Whatever the system, without any preparedness or adaptation, it absorbs the impact and experiences a reduction in functionality. It may even cease to function entirely. Secondly, the system can have a capacity to recover from this impact. It responds and recovers over time. Depending on the scale of the shock, the system may never return to normal functioning following the impact. Or in some cases, the system might be returned to a level of functioning that's better than it was before the shock, a concept often referred to as building back better, which we'll return to later. For us, resilience in the face of climate change is going to drive much of our work in the coming years. Typically, our work involves raising awareness, identifying hazards and vulnerabilities, assessing the likelihood of occurrence and the potential scale of the impact in a risk assessment process. After this, the follow-on stage involves adaptation planning. This is the process of building and increasing resilience, which will become an increasingly important part of the work we do for our clients. But what do these climate change hazards or impacts look like? For comparison, let's think about our old normal before the increased risks from climate change, when an environmental impact, such as a flood in a community, might typically have had a 1% chance in any 1 year of occurring. The system, when impacted, typically had the ability to absorb, respond, and then recover, often back to a normal level of functioning. However, the reality is that in our new normal, we're going to face deeper impacts, more frequent impacts, deeper and longer lasting impacts, and deeper impacts causing more permanent damage. We'll also face progressive change and chronic loss in functioning, for example, the loss and degradation of habitats or reduction in our water resources. There are 4 key components to building resilience. Let's take a look at what they mean. Awareness and planning are the essential foundation stages in planning adaptation and in preparing for response and recovery. Adaptation, both post an event and in anticipation of an event, involves thinking outside the box, not just simply building or rebuilding better, but building back smarter. Incremental adaptations to climate change, which are at the heart of much of our work, are not always a long-term solution, but transformational adaptation is. Response is typically dependent on our impact readiness and involves forecasting and monitoring, training and exercises, real-time modelling, emergency planning, deployment of defences, and post-event evaluation. Recovery includes both community and environmental recovery, preparedness, and management. At JBA, our ambition is to lead in society's pursuit for resilience to climate change. We will support our clients proactively to transform their businesses, systems, assets, or ways of working to become more resilient, not just following an impact, but before such impacts arise. We will also support our clients to recover more quickly from the shock of an impact, if and when it occurs, bringing them back online as early as possible. For us, it's not about building back better. We believe that improved resilience isn't about doing the same things but better. It's about transformational adaptation. At JBA, we will support our clients to build back smarter.
So yeah, that really concludes my piece. Hopefully to distill some of the challenges that we face around when we use this term resilience, and Beth's going to take us through some Cornwall examples now.
Hi everyone. So now we're going to talk a bit about sorry, can everyone hear me? Yeah, fab. So now we're just going to take a little bit of time to go through Cornwall and some of the schemes that we've carried out here, and as one of the main sort of streams that we work in with resilience is around property flood resilience. So we've already heard from Mary this morning about that. So really we wanted to touch on why Cornwall is such a unique area to carry out schemes like this in. So you've got lots of things around the natural environment that really impact how you can deliver a scheme. So obviously I don't need to tell you where you live, but you're located, it's located on the southwest tip of England. So you're surrounded on three sides by water, which you don't have anywhere else. There's lots of influences like the Gulf Stream. You've got a slightly different climate. So it's the only climate in the UK that's classed as a subtropical climate. Lots and lots of sunshine, and you have lots of small flashy catchments which are steep-sided and then quickly respond to rainfall. So that poses a number of challenges around seasonal population. So you have lots and lots of visitors that come down to Cornwall. You've got higher rates of tourism than in other areas. You've got a high proportion of second homes. And again, the flashy, quick responding catchments, which are a challenge when you're looking at trying to prepare for flooding, because you perhaps don't have as much time as you do in other areas where you've got a huge river that's just going to rise over a number of days, and you can kind of plan what it's going to do. There's also a high proportion of heritage buildings, which cause an impact, and there are restrictions on the type of measures that you could potentially put in place on heritage buildings. So what does this mean when you're carrying out a flood resilience scheme? So there are a number of impacts. So that might mean additional engagement activities are required. There might also be a lack of awareness and appreciation of flood risk. So particularly where you have high proportions of second homes and visitors coming in. So if you have tenants or holiday rentals, and you're in a quickly responding flashy catchment where you have to potentially work quite quickly, in the case of a flood, you're less likely to be able to do that if you have that sort of setup there. So that might mean we get lower rates of uptake, and then that can extend programmes when we're looking to implement property flood resilience schemes. Okay, so now I just want to touch on a couple of examples. So we'll go through these quite quickly. But we have there's an ongoing scheme that the Environment Agency is looking to put in place in Mousehole. And they're looking to help reduce flood risk in Mousehole through the use of property flood resilience. Many properties in Mousehole are eligible for an independent survey, but because of some of these factors, so we have down here, there was a high proportion of holiday lets and second homes, so additional engagement activities were required, and the need to involve local champions to kind of help maximise that uptake in the area. So the scheme was phased over two different areas. So the first being the Paul Stream, and then also Tumbleton. And I think there's about a 50% uptake in that area for those, but it's all part of a wider project, which is looking to involve natural flood risk management in the upper catchment, and then also improvements to the Tumbleton and Paul Stream infrastructure as well. So some of the other issues that we had in that area were the rapidly responding catchment and minimum flood warning, and then also the high proportion of heritage and listed buildings. Okay, and another good example of flood resilience in the southwest that we'd like to just draw upon is the Southwest PFR Pathfinder. So this was aimed at helping individuals and businesses and communities across the southwest to gain a better awareness of the flood risk and importance of PFR. So as part of this study, it was led by Cornwall Council, and there was also led by Devon County Council, Torbay, and the Isles of Scilly. And as part of that, they carried out a baseline survey to try and understand actually what has been put in place in across the Southwest and what are the barriers to property flood resilience there. And from that, they were able to create a number of different resources to support the building of community resilience. And that included the Be Flood Ready brand, which you can see is being rolled out nationally, and that's been adopted by Cywen. And there were a number of different sort of resources that came out of that project that included some information leaflets. There are a number of videos through the Be Flood Ready brand. There is a great website, and also it led to the creation of the Missy's Tale video, which is a really, really great resource. It was put together by Ardman Animations, and we might be able to get that running just a little bit later during the break, perhaps. And that project actually won an award, the 2022 Flood and Coast Excellence Award, which was great. And then here, we've just to finish off, we've got some examples of good resilience in practice. So Mary and Gitty both touched on the importance of coming together, communities acting together to put together flood plans and test and just be prepared going forward. So we have some examples here from some of the flood groups that we've worked with in the past. So we've got here some images from Topsham when they carried out a flood test. So they got together, they've got a great flood group there. And then also South Seal as well, which is the first scheme that I'd ever heard of that had, so they had their flood wardens, but they also had owls, which were outside the water level. So people that knew that they weren't going to be flooded, but they'd actually prepared so that they would be able to help those that were flooding, because obviously everybody's first port of call is going to be their own property. So yeah, so just a few examples there. And any questions?